13 months. Swami joined the Ramakrishna Mutt and mission in 1994 and received sannyas in 2004. Before being posted to the VSSC's Hollywood Temple, Swami served as an acharya, teacher of the Monastic Probationers Training Center at Belur Mutt. He has served the Ramakrishna Mutt and mission in various capacities, including being the vice principal of the Deoghar Vidyapith Higher Secondary School, principal of the Shikshana Mandir Teacher Education College at Belur Mutt, and the first registrar of the Vivekananda University at Belur Mutt. He is today going to share with us his thoughts on globalizing Vedanta based on his experience over the years. I warmly welcome you, Swami. Please take it off from here.
Namaste. Thank you for having me in this session. Your theme is globalizing Indian thought, and I thought it would be appropriate for me to speak about globalizing Vedanta. But before I get started, I'd just like to say that I belong to your tribe, because before becoming a monk, I did a degree in business management. I did my MBA from another institute, that is XIM Bhubaneswar, the Xavier Institute of Management in Bhubaneswar. So yeah. When I talk about globalizing Vedanta, I'm actually at a very interesting place. I'm sitting right now in the Vedanta Society of New York. And this was the first Vedanta society which was established by Swami Vivekananda himself. We all know how Swami Vivekananda came to Chicago in the World Parliament of Religions in 1893 to represent Hinduism. And then thereafter, the first thing, right after that, he came to New York, and this was the first organization, the first Indian ashram, quote unquote, which started in the West. And it's been running since 1894. And it has played a central role in, I think, the subject we have got today, globalizing Vedanta. So before we go into this, what exactly are we talking about here? Vedanta in itself, I would, there's a technical definition for it. It's the spiritual knowledge of the philosophy based on the Upanishads. But a more practical, down to earth, description would be, it is the philosophy of Hinduism. Especially here in the United States, if you see now various Indian denominations are here, people from different parts of India. So at one time there was this general category, Hindu temple, but now you have a Swaminarayan temple, you have Shiva temples, and different kinds of Hindu temples. So when I have to explain it to Americans, they find it bewildering. If you go to these temples, there's extraordinary artwork, colorful deities, men and women in these colorful dresses, exotic food. What's the thought behind all this? What are the philosophical principles behind all this? So when you look deeper, you will find Vedanta. Not just Advaita Vedanta, which we follow and we teach, but Vedanta comes in various flavors, various schools of Vedanta. So if you go to ISKCON, for example, started right here in New York, actually. Prabhupada, but he belongs to a traditional monastic order, the Gaudiya Vaishnava order from Bengal. And they have a philosophy of Vedanta. It is the Achintya Bheda Veda school. If you go to the Swaminarayan temples, so if you look deeper, what is the philosophy behind it? Another school of Vedanta is there. So like this, Vedanta is basically the philosophy of Hinduism. I'll talk about how that has been and is being globalized, but I'll go beyond Vedanta also. I'll talk about yoga, I'll talk about other things like Ayurveda, or about Buddhism, which is enormously popular, about even Jainism, Sikhism, how these have spread beyond the borders of India, and in some sense have become global phenomena now. And finally, I'll conclude by trying to establish a case for what is the point of globalizing Vedanta? What does it do for us? And what does it offer to people around the world? Why should they buy into it? All right, so a little bit of history. It all started a few hundred years ago when an enterprising young Frenchman, Anquetil Duperron, he came from France. At that time, the English and the French were vying for control of India. And this young, he was an Indologist, this young man, very young, in his early 20s. He wanted, actually, his project was to recover a copy of the original Zend-Avesta. Because, again, the whole idea was the religions of Europe, mostly Christianity and, of course, Judaism, but also they are familiar with Islam in the Middle East. They knew that it all came from an earlier religion, Zoroastrianism. And they also knew that there were strong Zoroastrian presence in India. So all this led him to believe that he could come to India and find out this Zoroastrian community and get copies of the original Zend-Avesta to study what was the source religion for Judaism, Islam, Christianity, and so on. Anyway, this was his background. He came and he traveled extensively in India, and finally he got hold of the Upanishads. And so this young Frenchman, he came across something which he had never expected. The local people of India, their most ancient philosophy, and that too in a text which was understandable to him because he had already learned some amount of Persian. So the story here is very interesting, that Aurangzeb's elder brother, Dara Shikoh, he was very interested in also in Hinduism, teachings of Hinduism also, quite a bit like long before him, Emperor Akbar. So Dara Shikoh had commissioned a group of Pandits in Benares to translate the Upanishads along with Shankara's commentaries, at least parts of it, into Persian. And so this work, which was completed before Dara Shikoh, of course, was executed by Aurangzeb, but this work was still existing. Multiple copies of it were there. And one of these copies found its way into the hands of this enterprising young Frenchman, Anquetil Duperron. And what this man did was, in France, he translated this work into Latin. And he called it Upanishad. So Upanishad. So the book was called Upanishad, and there's a reason why the title became like that. But anyway, now this was very well received in Europe. It was a little difficult to understand, but still. For example, the great German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, he read this book, and he was stunned by what he read. And he writes that, I consider that there is no study in the world as profitable as a study of this Upanishad, except perhaps the originals. And then he says, the study of these Upanishads has been the solace of my life and will be the solace of my death. In his masterwork, Schopenhauer's masterwork, The World as Will and Idea, he says, what I'm going to say in these volumes was best expressed, was best known to the ancient Hindus, and they called it Maya. So you see the impact that this text had on Schopenhauer. Not only Schopenhauer, other German thinkers also, and other European thinkers also. So that's a bit of the background. What a wonderful story, how these ancient texts were translated by a Mughal prince into Persian, how they found their hands into a French Indologist and traveled to Europe and were translated from Persian to Latin and fell into the hands of some of the leading European thinkers at that time, including Schopenhauer. So that's the story of how the Upanishads went to the West. But then we jump ahead a couple of centuries. When Swami Vivekananda came to the United States, came here, his project already was globalizing Vedanta. He was very clear about that, what he was doing. He had basically a twofold mission. One was to take Indian thought to the world stage. And he found that the World Parliament of Religions was a very good forum in which he could do that. And the second was to reflect this back to India from the United States, from the West, which was the colonial power, England at that time. From there, reflect back, as Sister Nivedita said, the voice of her own, the message of her own glory coming back to Mother India from the West, and sort of arousing a civilization which Vivekananda felt was not dead, but just sleeping, making it awake again. So this twofold mission: to spread Indian thought to the world and to awaken India to a sense of its own greatness. When he came here, already to some extent, the ground was prepared by the American transcendentalists. Especially, I would refer to Emerson, Thoreau, Walt Whitman. Emerson, the beloved philosopher and writer of 19th century America and transcendentalist, and it's an interesting story. At Harvard University, he gave a talk which was so heavily, colored by his study of the Upanishads that he was promptly kicked out of Harvard University. He was banned. You can't come here. It was seen to be too non-Christian at that time. So you're not allowed in. Over the years, he became the most famous philosopher in America. And so Harvard could not ignore him anymore. So they welcomed him back with honor. And now the philosophy department at Harvard University is called Emerson Hall. And if you go there, you'll see a big statue of Emerson sitting right in the middle of that building. So thanks to Emerson, thanks to Walt Whitman, thanks to Henry David Thoreau, many Vedantic ideas were already known to at least the intelligentsia in America, the reading public, among whom, interestingly, Vivekananda noted were women. He says the men are busy chasing the dollar. It's the woman who cultivates the higher things of life, in American life, he said. So when he came here, he embarked upon a series of lectures and publications, all of which were to present Indian thought, Vedanta and yoga primarily, and also bhakti, in a way which would be acceptable to the then American mind, easily understandable. To that end, from this place, from the Vedanta Society of New York, the first translation of Patanjali Yoga Sutras by Swami Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda's commentary on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras, which is called Raja Yoga. The first edition was published from here. The first edition of his famous Karma Yoga was published from here. In fact, years later, decades later, the famous American novelist J.D. Salinger would write that there are these two classics, Karma Yoga and Raja Yoga, which our modern American youth would do well to carry around in their pockets. So after Vivekananda, there was Swami Abhedananda, another disciple of Sri Ramakrishna, who was here for nearly 20-25 years. The first teacher of Vedanta to actually meet an American president at that time, McKinley, who promptly asked him about the conditions in India and the British rule in India. He met, in his diary records, how he met Edison. And Edison took him around in his laboratory and again asked him about what the British were doing in India. And there was an effect on American intelligentsia. For example, William James was very profoundly impressed by Swami Vivekananda. In his varieties of religious experience, he has quoted from Vivekananda and mentioned him. He also had interactions with Swami Abhedananda. Already by this time, Max Muller in England was very interested. Paul Dyson was interested. So a number of American and European philosophers, thinkers were already interested in Vedanta by this time. The next thing which happened was that now one book I could recommend to everybody, is a delightful read, is American Veda. So American Veda by Phil Goldberg, American Veda. So there he traces this phenomenon of the globalization or Americanization of Indian thought, how it came to the West, and the different movements, the different phases of its spreading. Swami Vivekananda that way was definitely a pioneer, but a tremendous pioneer, because after him followed this entire stream of Swamis and yogis and then Buddhist lamas, but the whole stream of teachers from India who came with a variety of thought, not just Advaita Vedanta as we teach it or I teach it here, but also, for example, Paramahamsa Yogananda, who founded the Self-Realization Fellowship here on the West Coast in Los Angeles. In Los Angeles, the Self-Realization Fellowship was there very soon after the Vedanta Society started. And then years later, you find Maharshi Mahesh Yogi coming, and transcendental meditation becoming very popular, like a buzzword. That happened here on the East Coast near New York. You find the whole yoga phenomenon starting. That's a very interesting thing. Not just spirituality as such, not just philosophy as such, but a whole system of wellness, physical wellness. So you have these in almost all these cases. It's interesting how these were individual people. The whole yoga, the hatha yoga thing, it can trace it back to the efforts of just a handful of Indians, mostly from Mysore. In fact, strangely, many of them were from that area. Pattabi Joyce, Krishnamacharya, and very famous, I'm forgetting the name, Iyengar, B.K. Iyengar. So Iyengar, Pattabi Joyce, Krishnamacharya, they're more or less contemporaries, and they came. They didn't have any governmental support or recognition behind them. They didn't have any money power behind them, no sponsors. They didn't have any organized religious body who were sending them or sponsoring them, nothing. They just came, and on the sheer power and attractiveness of the ideas and practices they brought with them, it became a hit. I mean, how much of a hit? Anybody who has traveled here in the United States, especially, can testify to it. Even in small towns in the Midwest, every other street, you will find a yoga studio and people practicing yoga. Here in New York, before the pandemic, every other street in Manhattan, you would find some kind of a yoga studio or some kind of, now in Central Park. Just today I saw a group of Americans sitting there, doing the pranayam and all. So this is a common sight now. The idea was attractive, and it became a huge commercial phenomenon. Yoga itself is an enormous industry now, and which stands on its own merits. So that happened. Then came other movements. For example, a very notable example is right here in New York in the 1960s. This Srila Prabhupada, he came and established the ISKCON, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. But these are all authentic old Indian traditions with new, let us say, avatars in India, in the United States. So he was a Gaudiya Vaishnava monk, and then he comes here and he sets up the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And now we know it's not just New York, it's not just the United States, it's all across the world now. But it started here. This is one side of it. And parallelly, from after the Second World War, you find Buddhism spreading. At first, there was this wave of Zen Buddhism, which became very popular, and remains popular. And then there was the Dalai Lama, Tibetan Buddhism, wonderfully presented. At this point, I'll just take a little sidebar and say, what does globalizing do for you? Once the Tibetans became refugees and they came here, they took a conscious decision under the very wise guidance of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, that we have to retain our identity, protect our identity. And the best way to do that, he was to double down and emphasize the core values of Tibetan Buddhism. And he says this one way to do this would be to spread it all across the world. So they took it upon themselves as a big mission to teach themselves, and teach for what? So that we can spread it across the world. And it's an amazing study. What they did was, that in order to spread it across the world, in order to make it palatable to people in France and in England and in the United States, you would have to give what people demand. So what do they demand? They demand meditation techniques. They demand philosophy. They demand a psychology. But they're not interested in your religious belief systems or even the little rituals, and all those things can stay, but they are the periphery. So the way the religion was sort of practiced in, say, in Tibet, from that they refined and extracted the core ideas, and then they transmitted it in a very systematic way. I see how popular it is, not just among people here, the Tibetan Buddhism that Dalai Lama has brought, but in academia also. I saw at Harvard University that they have a strong Tibetan Buddhist studies department. I, in fact, took a course there a couple of years back. So it benefited the Tibetans themselves. That thought system is globalized. It was of great benefit. People here, they really like and admire Tibetan Buddhism. And the Tibetans themselves have benefited in many, many ways. First of all, the core of their belief systems, core of their religion, philosophy has been sort of refurbished, reinvented for this day and age, remaining true to its original ideals, which is itself a great thing. The same thing has happened, I think, to lesser degree for Vedanta, for yoga. You can see how it travels back to India with a new glow to it, and a new interest is generated in it. So this is one side of it. Teachers, swamis, yogis, lamas, and yoga teachers, and all of it coming. There was an article a few years back in the Wall Street Journal about Vivekananda, the man who brought yoga to the West. The man who brought yoga to the West. It's slightly misleading because Swami Vivekananda did not bring yoga in this way it is understood now. Yoga studios and how to have a lean body and wear yoga pants and do lots of poses. So he brought yoga. He did bring yoga, of course, but in the sense of meditation and philosophy. But it was a very upbeat article about the contribution of Swami Vivekananda and how he influenced Americans. So that's the second part I want to talk about. Yes. Now, while these teachers were coming and teaching, what happened was a group of American intellectuals took it up. So Phil Goldberg, in his book, American Veda, has a chapter humorously titled, "The Swamis taught the smart guys and the smart guys taught the rest of us." So there he includes Aldous Huxley. He includes Gerald Heard, Christopher Isherwood, Joseph Campbell, J.D. Salinger, Houston Smith, a whole range of American intellectuals at that time, 1940s, 50s, 60s. Let me tell you how from academia, from the level of philosophy, it has come down to popular culture. Joseph Campbell, he was a student of Swami Nikhilananda, who was here in New York several decades ago in the 1960s, 70s. So we have two ashrams in New York. The other one is, we are on the west side, we're the older one. The other one is on the east side of Manhattan. And there Swami Nikhilanandaji was the founder and in charge. At that time, Joseph Campbell studied with Swami Nikhilanandaji. He, of course, became very famous for his work on mythology, Joseph Campbell. Now, Joseph Campbell's ideas, he transmitted it to George Lucas. George Lucas was looking for a plot for a science fiction movie. He incorporated a lot of those ideas into his famous Star Wars movie, which became a franchise which is going on till today. Kids know about that. I mean, it's a very popular thing now, Luke Skywalker and things like that. Now, many of those ideas, not all, but many of those ideas came from Joseph Campbell, and many of those ideas came from Nikhilanandaji and from Vedanta. Recently, Professor Jeffrey Long of Elizabethtown University, he gave a talk in our Vedanta Society 3 years ago, I think. And then the talk was humorously titled "The Yoga of Yoda." If those who know what about Star Wars, you know who Yoda is. So the yoga of Yoda. And he humorously said here at the Vedanta Society, he said, I teach a course on Star Wars and Eastern philosophy in his university. There in the class, I don't have to explain what is Star Wars. I have to explain what is Eastern philosophy. And here in the Vedanta Society, I don't have to explain to you what is Eastern philosophy, Vedanta and yoga, but I have to explain what is Star Wars because many of the audience were elderly people. So that's one way it has influenced American popular culture and many other ways. I mean, I hear there are a number of Hollywood films which borrow themes from Hinduism and Buddhism, Vedanta and Buddhism, and so on. Aldous Huxley's wonderful work, The Perennial Philosophy, that was heavily influenced by Swami Prabhavanandaji in the Vedanta Society of Southern California. Houston Smith, important figure. So those who are interested in comparative religion, one excellent book which is popular till today is The Religions of the World. Religions of the World by Houston Smith. It's used in religion classes here in universities. And Houston Smith was inspired by Swami Satprakashanandaji, who was the head of the Vedanta Society in St. Louis. And Houston Smith was actually all his life very closely associated with the different Vedanta societies. So he was another person who was instrumental in spreading Vedanta at this elite academic level. So these are, I'm just giving you glimpses of how this has been globalized. Now I will shift gears in the time that we have to talk a little bit about what can Vedanta give to the world. Why should at all people be interested? 2 or 3 areas which I'll touch upon, which I think are important. One is a very important area of the harmony of religions. You see, here in the United States, one big problem or a development in society, which we are noticing in the last several years. So they have a survey of religion, and large numbers of people are saying these days that young people, which religion do you belong to? They say none. They call it the rise of the nuns, not the NUN nun, the NONE nun. So we don't belong to any religion. Now, they don't belong to any organized religion, but are they not interested in spirituality? We find many of them actually are interested. They're interested in well-being, they're interested in peace of mind, they're interested in finding meaning in life, in doing good to society, but somehow they're not interested in the organized religions. Ken Wilber has pointed out that in this 21st century, to retain the youth in religion will have to take care of these 3 concerns. One is they must stop fighting among each other. I'm right, you're wrong, I'm going to kill you if you don't join me, that kind of thing. Young people these days are simply disgusted with that kind of thing. They are not interested. So this fighting among religions, that is one thing that has to be overcome. The second thing is this conflict between religion and science, insisting on things which have been already disproved by science or just seems irrational. Again, young people are not willing to subscribe to such things. The third thing Ken Wilber says is religion must find itself at least at par with modern values. Let me be more specific. Right now, here in the United States, how do I put this? There is a huge turmoil in society, especially in academia, regarding certain matters. Race has always been a problem, but nowadays it's more the gender wars, the whole LGBTQ plus issue. So now often religions have been seen to be on the wrong side, the illiberal side of this debate. So Ken Wilber says that religions at least must not, even if they don't endorse these new movements, they must not be seen to be opposing what society is beginning to accept. So their value systems must be updated. It is in this context that Vedanta can contribute. Notice when Swami Vivekananda spoke at the Parliament of World Religions, he actually set out this agenda. He said, people were curious. So why is this strange person here? almost nobody had seen a Hindu earlier. So do I want that a Christian should become a Hindu? I'm quoting him. He says, God forbid. Do I want that a Hindu should become a Mohammedan? God forbid. Or a Mohammedan should become Buddhist? God forbid. What do I want then? I want that a Hindu should be a better Hindu, a Christian should be a better Christian, a Muslim should be a better Muslim, and a Buddhist a better Buddhist. This idea, it took root, that each of these religions are true, and they, you can go back to first principles. There's no need to fight among each other, and they can all be helpful. This Vedantic paradigm, instead of trying to convert people from one religion to another, from say their own religion to a new type of religion, rather, let me say what I mean by paradigm. So from a Vedantic perspective, the new idea is that how do you reconcile religions, thought systems which talk about clearly different ideas? So how would you reconcile them? For example, all the Abrahamic religions here, especially Christianity, talks about God, and Buddhism doesn't talk about God, or sometimes it actively denies that there is such a thing as a God. How would you reconcile that? The Vedantic way would be, the paradigm would be to treat these as paths, not as the end. Like in Sri Ramakrishna's formulation, Jato Mat Tato Pat, to treat all of these thought systems, belief systems, religions as paths which will lead you to the goal. And as paths, they are all valid, and they can be different. You don't have to have the same path. And Google Map will give you different paths to reach the same goal, and they all work. So Sri Ramakrishna would famously say, he was sitting in the Kali temple in Dakshineshwar, and he would say to the devotees who would come to him from Calcutta, some of you have come by boat, some of you crossed the bridge, some of you came by coach, some of you walked, but in the end, you all got here. Similarly, he would say the Hindu, the Muslim, the Christian, the Brahmo at that time, he would say, they will all reach the goal. So that's one interesting idea. And I'll tell you, it is taking root. I am hearing this. People may not attribute it to Vedanta or to Vivekananda, but I hear this in interfaith conversations. People refer to the validity of the unique truth of each religion, and how they can all help us in reach the goal, or human wellness, whatever it is. So this is one contribution. We can talk more about this if you're interested. There's a pushback also. I can talk about that also. Aldous Huxley, when he wrote the book, The Perennial Philosophy, his idea, he put very beautifully, a wonderful book. He says that there's this underlying perennial philosophy which is present in all religions, and which talks about an ultimate reality and a way to reach that ultimate reality, and a common shared ethic, and which you can see manifested in different ways in different religions. There's a pushback. Nowadays, there's this book, I forget the name of the author, God is Not One. So there he has said that, no, the religions are all different. And so anyway, there's a pushback against this kind of thinking also. The second area in which Vedanta can make a big contribution would be something very close to my heart: consciousness studies. So right now we are living at what I might call the golden age of consciousness studies. Right here in New York is Professor David Chalmers, who coined the term the hard problem of consciousness. And he's the head of the mind-brain consciousness unit here at NYU. He pointed out that there's a theoretical a difficulty in principle of reducing consciousness to the brain. Clearly, there's a correlation between the mind and the brain, but how can purely physical phenomena like little electrical activity in our neurons, how can they be first-person experience? Where there's a conceptual jump there. Bursts of electricity which can be tracked by your fMRI scans. How is it the taste of coffee? The smell of a rose, or seeing the red color of a nose, the feeling of touching something. These are all first-person, direct, lived experiences. They're not bursts of electricity. How? is this happening? And he says there is really no way. There is no way of reducing consciousness to just matter. And here Vedanta can contribute, not just Vedanta, all the different thought systems in Indian philosophy. I'll talk a little more about this before I go ahead. You see, I think in the introduction, somebody mentioned that I got a chance to spend a year at Harvard a couple of years back. And one thing I did was I took a course in the philosophy of mind. So that gave me a chance to do a survey of all the latest literature in the philosophy of mind. And let me tell you a little bluntly my considered opinion on the state of affairs. Descartes was nearly 300 years ago, was probably the last person who said something interesting in the field, that he felt that mind and body are completely different, the Descartesian dualism. And the last 300 years, especially the last 100 years, there's been a struggle to reduce mind to brain, the mind to matter. So all the papers that we studied in that course, you can neatly divide them into two categories. One category is these guys who are arguing that in this way we can reduce mind or consciousness to the neuronal activity in the brain, or to behavior, or to language, something physical. And the other group of papers arguing, sorry guys, it doesn't work. None of your arguments work. You cannot convincingly reduce mind or consciousness to something physical. And that's where the subject is stuck. It's just stuck. Now, what can we do? What use is Indian thought in this context? Professor Evan Thompson, who is at the University of British Columbia, has written this wonderful book, Waking, Dreaming, Being. And there he says, consciousness studies is not new. It is 5,000 years old. Consciousness studies started with the Upanishads, the texts called Upanishads in India. He starts with that and he goes into Buddhist philosophy and so on. So let me just give you an example of how they thought about consciousness in ancient India. Consciousness and matter. What are the possibilities? One possibility is that consciousness has emerged out of matter. That was the theory of the ancient Charvakas. Body produces consciousness, body produces mind, which is very much in keeping with what a modern materialist reductionist might think. The second option is that matter emerges out of consciousness. You would say, who says that? Well, actually, all religions, the theistic religions, those who believe in God, they all say that. After all, what is the common characteristic of God in all the religions that believe in God? Is that God created the universe. Now, your God is definitely a conscious being. So from consciousness emerged this material universe. So that's the second option. First one, that consciousness emerged from matter. Second one, matter emerged from consciousness. So all the dualistic, theistic religions, they believe this. The third option would be consciousness and matter are parallels. Neither emerge from the other. They exist fundamentally and they interact. Who believes that? The ancient Sankhyans did. They divided all of the universe into Prakriti and Purusha. Purusha being consciousness alone and Prakriti being material nature. And strangely enough, right now, in the 21st century, right here in NYU, Professor David Chalmers is recommending something very similar. He doesn't know that he's echoing Kapila 5,000 years ago, but he's saying that since we cannot reduce consciousness to matter, we are maybe forced to admit what he calls a crazy idea, that consciousness may be a fundamental reality of the universe. Just like space, time, matter, energy, consciousness is a fundamental reality, and somehow it interacts with living matter through brains and nervous systems. That's the new idea he's giving. Although it has some antecedents, it is called panpsychism. And he's humorous. So somebody asked him about his interest in panpsychism. And he said that, if you think about this consciousness and matter problem long enough, you will either become a panpsychist or you will go into administration. So, with apologies to all the administrators present here. So that is another option. Consciousness and matter are parallel realities. The another option that we get is that matter is an appearance in consciousness, which is the Vedantic, Advaita Vedanta approach. The whole idea of Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya basically means consciousness is the reality in which material universe appears. This is not as crazy as it sounds. A new article by this philosopher Galen Strawson in University of Texas, Austin. So he wrote this article in the New York Times, only sort of half humorously. He says the hard problem of matter. He says that it is, why should we talk about the hard problem of consciousness? Matter is the one which is mysterious. The more you investigate matter through modern particle physics and all, it's matter which is disappearing before our eyes. From atoms to subatomic particles to quarks to, now they're talking about superstrings. What is matter is the mystery. Consciousness, he says, is not a mystery. Consciousness is directly evident to us. You are assuming consciousness is created by a brain, then you cannot explain how consciousness is created by a brain, then you say hard problem of consciousness. But why are you assuming that? Start with consciousness and then try to see what are the objects presented to consciousness. So which is a very, very Vedantic way of thinking. And those who are trained in Indian philosophy will recognize that. So consciousness studies is one area I really think, and it's not, I'm not alone. The Dalai Lama himself has encouraged a lot of study of mind and consciousness in interaction with neuroscientists. So, and a lot of papers have been published also. I think it's a very promising area. Wellness, of course, it's a very well established and recognized area. Ayurveda, yoga especially, just see the impact it has had when the Indian government decided to make it, a few years back, International Day of Yoga. All they had to do was to just bring a proposal in the United Nations. It was passed in the United Nations with an overwhelming majority because yoga was already a globalized phenomenon. It had been so for decades. And not by any planned effort, just the efforts of a few pioneers, and then it sort of caught fire and it spread, and it's standing on its own merits. Another area, I think, I'll just touch upon it and stop because I think I've just about run out of time. Another area in which Indian thought, Vedanta, can help is the area of ethics. By which I mean the philosophical discipline which studies ethics. One class I was privileged to attend was by none other than Professor Amartya Sen. So he's teaching, I mean, some of you know that he's teaching at Harvard. He's been teaching at Harvard and at Cambridge for like several decades now. And he holds chairs in economics and philosophy. So I asked him if I could just sit in his class, and he was very cordial. He asked me to sit there. And frankly, I was prepared to be bored because I thought he's an elderly gentleman. Maybe his class will be boring. But I was so pleasantly surprised. I mean, at this age also, he's such a wonderful speaker and teacher that you can imagine what he must have been 20 years ago. He must have been quite the charmer. So I was delighted to sit in his class and listen. The course was on ethics. Basically, the same old question: why should I be good? Where do I ground ethics? Foundations for ethics. Now, most of what he said, I completely and totally disagreed with. But anyway, I didn't say that. I am a guest there, so it's not my place to say it, and I don't think it will do much good at this age. But one thing I noticed was that all throughout, in the modern understanding, I would say Western understanding, but that's now the modern understanding of ethics all over the world, this problem stands that why should I be good? Whether it's a teleological theory, utilitarian theory, the deontological theories, everywhere there's a desperate search for a route to ground it in, to ground ethics. For these reasons, I should be good. And there is desperate to find something. Vedanta has a contribution there, which is an unexplored possibility. Swami Vivekananda said, why should I be good? He says, all ethics can be grounded in this idea of the oneness of all existence. When Advaita Vedanta talks about one non-dual reality, Ekam Sat, which is our own reality. Because there is this one existence, and you are that one existence, if you hurt somebody else, if you do something wrong to somebody else, you're basically hurting yourself. You're acting against your self-interest. See, the original question was, why should I help anybody? Why should I be good if it goes against my self-interest? Now you have identified self-interest with ethics. It is in your enlightened self-interest to be ethical. So, and one might not agree with that, but I'm sure it's a wonderful contribution. And I see nobody has really thought about it that way. I mean, among the prevalent theories of ethics. So that's another area in which Vedantic thought might be helpful for global thought. I'll end with something that's just the opposite of what I have been saying. I'm talking about globalizing Indian thought, but I'll end with a point on Indianizing Indian thought. So far I have said, I would give you the history of how Vedanta was globalized through Anquetil du Perron and the Upanishads being transmitted to the West, and Vivekananda and all the teachers coming to America and so on, and American intellectuals being influenced and then spreading to popular culture and film and so on, and the health, yoga, Ayurveda, all of that. Now, it's equally important for us Indians to be grounded in Indian thought. Vedanta definitely, but all sorts of our heritage. The more I see what is going on here, and I see how it has a shadow effect on us, the more I'm convinced that we really need to go back to our roots and then build upwards from there. It's not a new thought. Vivekananda himself saw this danger where he criticized Indians late 19th century for being constantly looking to the West for approval, for validation. Rabindranath Tagore talked about it, the dangers of imitation. Most strikingly, Professor K.C. Bhattacharya, in his remarkable, it was a lecture, became an article later, Swaraj in Ideas. Remember, at that time, Swaraj was the struggle for Indian independence. This was before 1947, in the 1930s. So Professor K.C. Bhattacharya says that it may be that very soon that the British colonial power will leave these shores. This was before independence. But remember, it will leave a shadow in our mind, the whole idea of the shadow self. The colonizing power will stay on in our minds. And the example he gives is stunning, especially for its relevance to today. He says, what is the sign of a colonized mind? It is immediately evident in the lack of creativity. And then he gives an example. Shakespeare. How an Oxford literature don writes about Shakespeare. It'll be very different when you cross the English Channel and go to a French professor in Paris and how he writes an appreciation of Shakespeare. Then imagine how different it should be across the 7 seas when you come to India, at that time Calcutta University, and you ask a professor of literature in Calcutta University to write an appreciation of Shakespeare, how different it would be. But look at what they write. They all look like second-rate copies of that Oxford Don. See, we are not coming from our root. You're not standing on your own feet. You're not coming from anything original. The idea of education was the best possible imitation of our British masters, the best possible imitation of our British colonizers. Sri Aurobindo, before he became well-known, before his political career and long before his spiritual, as teacher, becoming a spiritual teacher, he was a professor, a lecturer at the Baroda College. After coming back from England, his parents made sure he never learned anything Indian. He had an English governess, was not allowed to learn Bengali, sent off to England as the first opportunity. He grew up there, highly educated in the Oxford, Cambridge culture. When he comes back, he's given a job, English literature, Baroda College, I think. And he writes very touchingly that why are we teaching this? The stuff that I studied in Cambridge, it has no relevance to these young men, and they're all young men at that time. Girls did not get a college education. It has no relevance to their culture. These boys from Rajputana coming from small towns, what do they have to do with English literature and poetry? They're not learning anything about their own culture. They're not learning anything in their mother tongues. They're forced to memorize an alien culture and in an alien tongue. To what purpose? So that is continuing even now. I'll give you little examples, which is so striking. Anybody, we all see this all the time. It's all around us. All the developments which I see here, either in East Coast in New York or on the West Coast in California, within a month or two, it's reflected back in India. Now, some of them they are all very good movements, whether it's the LGBTQ plus movement or the Me Too movement or whatever it is. Not in my name, hashtag this, hashtag that. All very good. But my point is only one and only one. Why is it that it starts here and goes there? Let me see the work the other way around. Let me see a few ideas start there and come here. Someone was talking about Halloween becoming very popular in India now in the big cities. Halloween is very popular here. Again, nothing wrong. Don't mistake my critique. My critique is this, that, so Halloween, why is it becoming popular in India? Somebody said, oh, there's a commercial interest behind it. And no, that's not a valid idea. The shopkeepers in New York are also as commercial as the shopkeepers in Mumbai, or if not better. So they are not commercializing Holi or Diwali. Holi and Diwali are not becoming popular festivals in the United States. Although it can, if they became, it would be a huge commercial bonanza for people. It's not happening. It's always a one-way street. And I'm not saying there's any kind of plot to it or any kind of, nothing. It's just a power gradient. If you are downhill from the dominant cultural power in your age, whether it's England 50 years ago or it's America today, you have to consciously, we have to consciously, deliberately make an effort to stand on our feet and then absorb whatever is good and whatever is coming from the West or from other parts of the world. Then you truly have a synthetic culture which is strong. Otherwise, you keep getting swept away. And one might say, what's wrong with that ultimately? What's wrong with it is you are interested in economic development. We want India to be one of the leading economic powers of the world. We know very well this is an idea-driven economy in the world today. And ideas require creativity. You see, the loop is closed here. There's a direct link between being rooted in your own traditions, immersed in your own traditions, and able to respond creatively to the world and to the situation, from there to economic development. There's a direct link between them. Let me give a couple of examples and stop. Most of my examples are from philosophy because I'm interested in that. When I was a student, we had a subject called logic in +2 in class 11. And we used to take that because it used to get the good marks. So we took that. And I studied, and it was all Aristotelian logic, ancient Greek logic. It's only after becoming a monk and learning about Indian philosophy, I became aware that we have one of the most sophisticated systems of logic ever developed in the ancient world, the Nyaya system, and then the Navya Nyaya system. Very sophisticated, far more sophisticated than Greek logic, ancient Greek logic. Why didn't even we hear about it? Why isn't it in this? I'm sure all these things are different now, maybe, but it was not at that time. Nobody even thought about it. And there was it's not that it was a plot. It is just that the syllabus which had been designed by our British colonizers, that was modified a little bit every 10 years or so. And all the universities sort of kept on doing that. There was no attempt to rethink. And that is because we are not grounded in our own thought systems. Why ancient Greek logic? If you had taught us latest mathematical logic, I would have said there's something to it. But if you're going to teach ancient logic, why not ancient Indian logic? Far superior. The second example I will give and stop here is Israel. I was told by this mathematician, he is in Oxford University. His name will come to me. He is the successor to Richard Dawkins in that post for popularization of science. I'll tell you the name. So anyway, his wife is Israeli. So he had invited me for a lunch one day, and over that lunch, he told me that, when Israel was founded, The founding fathers in Israel, they said that we must have Hebrew as our language, national language. And that was a dead language, he said, Swamiji. Nobody used it really. And they insisted we will have that. And they revived that language. And this mathematician was telling me, there's no question of doing higher academics, like pure mathematics and all in Hebrew. This is a ridiculous idea. They forced it. They invented, sat down, made committees, invented terms, but they made it certain that everybody from kindergarten to PhD level was using Hebrew. Now look, 50 years, 60 years, 70 years down the line, Israel became independent in 1948. It is an intellectual, technological, economic powerhouse. Tel Aviv University, Jerusalem University are among the best in the world. They are Nobel Prize winners from there. Did their lack of English, does it hinder them? Not much, not much. And until I'd heard this, I wouldn't have believed it, because I had the same point of view as I think most of us had. When growing up and college and university level, if somebody had told me you have to do economics or business management in Hindi or in Sanskrit or in Odia or Bengali, I would have laughed. How is it possible? All of the good books are in English. I'm not saying that you have to do exactly what the Israelis did. Maybe it's not at all possible in a country like ours. So it's enormously larger and more complicated and diverse than Israel. But the point is to be taken. All right. So these are the points I wanted to present before you. Globalizing Vedanta. Thank you so much.
Swamiji, thank you so much for taking your time out for this wonderful talk on globalizing Indian thought, globalizing Vedanta, and towards the end, as you were discussing, Indianizing Indian thought, that was also a very interesting take from this side. Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to sincerely request our respected director, Professor Debashish Chatterjee, to say a few words, because he is a real admirer of your work. He was talking to me, and he said that I'll make it a point to read your lecture, and he is now going to join us and contribute to this discussion. Thank you so much, sir.
Sarvapriyananda ji, namaste. And I have been not just an admirer, I've been following your work since your days in IIT Kanpur. And since I have a very deep relationship with the Ramakrishna mission, I can say that your being in New York is 200 times more important than anywhere else. And I think the benefit of that accrues to IMK. If you were in Belur Math, we would have probably chosen somebody else for the talk. So the idea of Indianizing Indian thought sits very deep in my heart, because nobody else knows. When we started in IIM Calcutta Center with a formidable colleague of mine, S.K. Chakrabarty, and we wanted Vivekananda to be part of our conversation, there was a deep reluctance in our inner circle. And I still remember migrating on a Fulbright scholarship to Harvard Kennedy School, where I wanted to float a course on Vivekananda, or seminar, after my visit to a village called Anisquam, where Swamiji stepped into, and I thought to celebrate that little inflection point in Indian history. And there were 149 students enrolled for my first session. And this is people from Harvard Business School, Kennedy School, School of Religion, Tufts, MIT. And what I do realize is that the reason why Vedanta is bound to succeed, because it is loosely organized, unlike most religions. Houston Smith, Swamiji made a note of Houston Smith. I remember a conversation with him, and I read his book on religions. And he said that devil had found the truth, and he was coming down the hill, and messengers of God went to the God and said, devil is coming down and he's willing to propagate the truth. What will we do now? He said, don't worry, I'll just help him organize the truth. Then we will see where truth goes. So the fundamentals of Vedanta it's not as rigid as religion is. And is organized around convictions and realization, not around rituals and just templates. I think this is the only way to religions meet. And this is very important. And finally, I don't want to take much of your time because we have other things to do. I'm sure all of you have preoccupation. I had a conversation. I was lucky enough, like Swamiji was, to have a conversation with Mr. Amartya Sen, Professor Amartya Sen, in a cocktail party. And I just raised the issue of my book on the Bhagavad Gita, Timeless Leadership, which was very widely supported in the West, but not read as much in India. And so I said, what is your view of the Bhagavad Gita? So he said, and with utmost sincerity, that it was a rather long conversation. I didn't know how to respond to a man who's sort of larger than life in India. I said, have you ever wondered that it could be a rather short attention span trying to grasp a rather long conversation? Is it a long conversation or is it short attention? I think our great works need a depth of attention, which is not happening. But we also need to understand the new world, the WhatsApp generation with 500 billion messages going back and forth. Within Indian context on WhatsApp, we need to really look at a generation that will not be fed on the heavy-handed sort of stuff that we ram down. We need great teachers, great exponents of the subject. And today I found in Sarvapriyananda's talk, there is no attempt to evangelize, no attempt to ram down your throat something that he himself believes in, but just a general trigger for conversation. And I think globalizing Indian thought, when I coined the word on behalf of I am Kozhikode, there were a few takers. But today I realized, starting from the Prime Minister of our country to one of the most celebrated monks of our times, Swami Sarvapriyananda ji, we have support for this great idea. And I hope the best idea prevails. I hope truth prevails. And it prevails in our lifetime, so that we see the flourishing, the fruition of something as important as this, that Swamiji had started long back. To see that fruition of that is going to be a lifetime sort of achievement, I think. So thank you, Swamiji, for your enormous contribution. I think what you have said will become a dossier for many research papers, and I'm pretty certain you'll be recipient of some of the notes at some point in time, that your talk has triggered some thought processes that we wouldn't have imagined before you talked to us. So namaste, and thank you once again for your precious time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee,
Thank you, Professor Chatterjee.
For your kind words. Now I'll open up for question and answer. Swami, can we take 10 minutes?
Absolutely. I'll be delighted to.
Okay, good. So then we are open since it's a very small group of. Yes, Swamiji. Yeah, go ahead.
Just give me a second. I think I just remembered where I can find the name of that. It's just in my mind, the name of that mathematician whose name I couldn't recall. 1 second.
Yes, take your time.
Pranamesh, you could just line up the questions ahead in time.
Yeah.
So they type,
We can type in the chat window if you have any questions.
Yeah.
You can also raise your hand and ask briefly. So it's Marcus du Sautoy. He is a professor of mathematics at Oxford University. And you know where I met him? It's a very interesting story. It's relevant to globalizing Vedanta. There's this ashram in the Bahamas, one of the best ashrams I've seen in the West. And it's all run by Jews. There are no Indians there. They're mostly Israelis. And they're all sannyasis. They're wearing gerua. They have been initiated. They're part of the Shivananda Yoga Ashram, which is called the Shivananda Yoga Ashram, Bahamas. And it's a wonderfully run, a very serious group of people. They practice their Hatha Yoga. They train people in Hatha Yoga. They practice morning, evening meditation. They study seriously Vedanta. They have their little Krishna bhajan and things like that. So it would feel it's an ashram in Rishikesh run by Indians, but in the whole ashram, there's only one Indian. And that was a priest from Kerala, a Nambudri priest who was employed there to perform the regular rituals. In this context, which is an amazing thing, we don't do research on this, we don't write papers on this. What an amazing phenomenon. Israelis, most of them, Jewish and proud to be Jewish, and yet completely adopting Indian dress, culture, thought patterns, philosophies, practices, and in the Bahamas. There I met this gentleman, Professor Marcus Sautoy. He is the successor to Richard Dawkins. They have some British government post for the popularization of science. So he told me that Richard Dawkins' approach was completely anti-religion. So he was militantly atheist. So he would, attack religion at every possible opportunity. And Professor Marcus Sautoy said, I'm reversing that approach. My approach is more conciliatory. So I will go forward and try to learn from different religious groups and what they want to teach, but maintaining the scientific temper all throughout. And I would want that to be inculcated, imbibed by different religious groups also. So we stuck up a dialogue. I was teaching Aparokshanubhuti. He came and sat for all of the classes. Then he invited me. He said, next time if you come to England, please come to my house. And then I went there. That's where he told me the importance of language and being rooted in the heritage, and then how it leads to scientific, cultural, and economic development, giving me the example of Israel. All right.
We have a question.
Yes.
So this is also a question I thought I will ask you. How to bring in Vedanta into higher education system? And how to simplify the whole process of enabling the students to absorb the fundamentals of Vedanta very quickly, and so that they feel motivated and they feel proud of what we can offer as a culture.
Right. It can be done and should be done. People often say that we should try to give the best possible education, high quality education. That's the only thing that matters, and seems to be a no-brainer. Absolutely, isn't that what matters? It doesn't. This is many things about which I have changed my mind after coming here and interacting with academia here and students here, and the products of the best institutes in India coming here and working. I've had students from the IITs. I'll quote, young man, studied in IIT, working here in Wall Street. He says, I come from a small town. My parents were lower middle class. They worked very hard to get me where I am. And now I've done it. I'm earning more every month than my father earned in his whole life. Okay. My question now is, now what? What is the point of this? I'm working day and night for an American company, earning millions of dollars for them. To what end? And I asked my parents, and they said, "Pata nahi, humko to itna hi pata tha that we have to do this much for you, and after this, what next? I have no idea. We have no idea." And he says, it's only after coming to the Vedanta Society, reading Vivekananda, reading these books, I begin to get a sense of purpose, higher purpose in life. But he said, couldn't our schools, our colleges and universities have told us this? This is something I've heard again and again from very highly successful Indians who are products of the best Indian education, the kind of Indian education that we want to give to everybody. Having given that, we have not achieved anything. I mean, it's always better than low quality education, but just the high quality education in itself is still, in Sri Ramakrishna would used to say, if you have zeros, you line up as many zeros as you want, you still get a zero. But if you have a 1, after that, every zero adds value. So that 1 is this being grounded in Indian spiritual philosophical thought. How it can be done, it's not at all difficult. Somebody asked me, so how is it that your talks in abstract, abstruse Vedanta philosophy, how are they popular among young college students in IITs, for example? You wouldn't expect that to be the case. It's popular, I thought later. One is you appeal to self-interest, that how it's going to equip you, give you a sense of purpose, improve your concentration, help you to overcome anxiety, make yourself like you are there for others, this thought of expanding beyond the self, of leading a much better inner life. Whatever happens afterwards, very good in your career, but inner life, it becomes a much nobler and higher inner life. It can be put in those ways, and it can be taught. I'm so sorry to hear time after again and again that different colleges and universities, they're getting rid of humanities courses, they're getting rid of philosophy courses, because there are no students who want to study them. There is no money to be made from that. And why is it that Cambridge, Oxford, Harvard, these places, they cultivate religion and philosophy? People are amazed to think that there are discussions on the nature of enlightenment sitting at Harvard University, serious discussions. And that's great. That's the way it should be. Texts, ancient Buddhist texts, the latest editions are being written there. I had heard of this term knowledge production, but I had not really seen it until I saw it in action at Harvard. These are the people who are writing the textbooks for the next generation. You see, our readings in some cases where the textbooks which are going to be published by Oxford University Press, the professor is giving them out as readings for our input before it goes to press. Now, what are they writing about? Our heritage. They're writing about Buddhism. They're writing about, not so much about Vedanta, about Eastern philosophies. So we should be able to do that and give it to students in different ways. You know, philosophy is a subject, compulsory subject in France. I didn't know that. I asked a French philosopher, why is that France still produces good philosophers? And other countries are basically, even USA, people don't like philosophy. It's just on its way out, probably. And the gentleman said, because he said it is taught from school onwards, and philosophers are like cultural, heroes, icons there. And that's why thought is still seen as something wonderful, something to be aspired for. To be a thought leader is something to be aspired for in France. We should do that. We have this enormous heritage of philosophizing thinking. Yeah.
So one more question, Maharaj. So I'll make it short given the paucity of time. The thing is, though latest scientific research is giving increasing evidence of creativity on all aspects of life, doesn't seem to be implemented on ground. Would you share the Vedanta philosophy of creativity?
I will not go into that. In fact, the word pratibha, which we use for talent or creativity, this has actually there's a whole philosophy behind it. I don't know much about it. Professor our Gopinath Kaviraj, he has written an article on pratibha in Kashmiri Shaivism, as far as I remember, but I don't remember the details. But you see the range of philosophical systems. I don't have to appeal to Advaita Vedanta. I can appeal to Sankhya. I can look into Nyaya. I can look into Vaisheshika. For hermeneutics, I can look into Purva Mimamsa. I can draw upon an enormous range of Buddhist logic texts, epistemology, Buddhist epistemology. Jainism is an area which I don't know much about. Not enough work has been done there. So, yes. Only one thing I will say about creativity here, again, Professor Kalidas Bhattacharya, not Kalidas Bhattacharya, Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, K.C. Bhattacharya's point is that creativity will come when you immerse yourself in something that is not alien to you. And from that perspective, you look at what is alien to you. So before jumping into Kant and Hegel and Marx and Nietzsche, you jump into Shankara and Kumarila and Dharmakirti, Chandrakirti, Nagarjuna, all these ancient thinkers, and then you look at what people are saying in other countries, in other thought systems. I think then your response will be a more creative response, much more creative response, and much more genuine response.
Maharaj, one last question. This is a very interesting question because, as you may be aware, this is also open to participants in the 8th Pan IIM conference, where all the IIMs come together once in a year.
Yes.
So this probably will be very interesting. And also, this is streamed live. So a lot of people who may not be joining in this particular Zoom link, they are watching you all over the world. So one last question before we let you go. We'd like to have you for another maybe 1 hour or so. But the next interesting question is, can you share some Indian thoughts which has helped the economic development?
Yeah. Can we share some Indian thoughts which has helped economic development? It's a little way out of my field. I mean, I did study economics as a college student, and of course, part of my MBA training. And yes, so some Indian thought, if it has helped economic development, it will have to be an Indian thought. I'll tell you indirectly how non-Indian thoughts did not help economic development. And this is coming to me from something that I had read as a student. There's a beautiful paper by Professor V.K.R.V. Rao on the leakages in the Keynesian multiplier. So we were required to read it as part of our macroeconomics paper. We are not required to read it. I read it just out of sheer pleasure of reading it. He says that all our Cambridge-trained economists, in those days, Harvard and all was not important. Cambridge was important, and Oxford was important. So they come back to India, and they're full of Keynesian economics and how to develop the backward parts of India. So one idea was you invest, huge industry is set up, and there will be these multiplier effects. If you go to a place like Orissa, where, for example, Rourkela steel plant is set up, And it's in the middle of a resource rich, but a very poor area, a tribal area. So the idea was, the economics predicted that once you invest so much money, the demand is generated, and the local people will strive to provide what is needed, and then they'll get income, and the Keynesian multiplier takes hold, and there is a multiplication of income, and general poverty will be removed, prosperity will ensue. Nothing of the kind happened, just the reverse happened. Economists know this very well, a disastrous case. What happened was that the moment money was spent there, what happened? Who came to set up the Rourkela steel plant? Engineers came, but not from local area. There are no engineers there. They're not even graduates. They're not even literate people, not even schools there. They came from Maharashtra. They came from Bengal. They came from Tamil Nadu, and they settled down there. Then they generated demand because they want food, and they want all sorts of necessities, none of which the local people could provide. All of that had to be bought in from Calcutta or from Patna or from other places. What happened to the local people who were supposed to benefit from that excess demand? They became laborers. They left. Once prosperous and healthy villages were destroyed when the young people left that and went to this shiny new steel city to become servants and laborers. Old people, children were left behind in the villages. So there was this shadow, this lampshade effect around this very shiny embodiment of Indian economic development. This is a lesson, a costly lesson. But I'm saying again, why did we fall into this trap? We fell into this trap because with eyes wide open, our best minds went to Cambridge University, learned exactly what was taught there, which was not wrong, which was perfectly relevant for England and for America. We are taught all these things in the macroeconomics course, that see, where there is already an excess capacity which is not being used because of economic cycles, invest more, and then the empty factories will start working again and supply will be generated. Your Keynesian multiplier will work. But that's not India. That's not the third world. How strange is it that you take this and blindly apply it to India? But why would such people do that? Go a little deeper. It's because there is this fascination. Indian mind has a fascination with brilliant ideas. We're intelligent people. We pick it up. But unless you're grounded on your own feet, at this ability to think for yourself, we keep quoting things, question everything. We don't question anything at all. We should literally question everything. Vivekananda said something which sounds very arrogant, but actually is true, literally true. I'll tell you what it is. He said, if anything comes from the West, reject it as wrong until it is proven to be right. Anything's come from India, take it as right until it is proven to be wrong. Now, at first, it sounds very chauvinistic and arrogant, but no, it makes perfect sense. Your leading philosophers in the West would say exactly right, absolutely right. Derrida, Foucault, or even Zizek. I met Zizek, Slavoj Zizek. All of their ideas, one thing is common, it's context, context, context. They would be furious. How dare you take something of my ideas and put it in an entirely different context without rethinking it? What I say is bound to be wrong in your context. It's bound to be right in my context. So we must start with this radical, I won't say rejection, questioning, understanding, then only accepting it. K.C. Bhattacharya's language again. I'm not saying that you should reject foreign ideas. He's saying I'm pleading for a faithful translation of foreign concepts into Indian ideas. Very beautifully put. I've forgotten the exact language. You have to translate foreign concepts into the Indian context. Okay, this is what I want to say.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. Thank you so much for taking time out. We love to have you more often. If you get time out of your busy schedule. Again, I really thank you from the bottom of your heart to present the keynote address for this very interesting conference. I'd also like to sincerely thank our director, Professor Debashish Chatterjee, for conceiving the idea. And when I came to the campus, Globalizing Indian Thought was the first idea. thing that I saw while stepping into the campus, and I was really amazed that there is someone who's really thinking deep about it. And I have been with Professor Chatterjee for almost now been like 3 years, and the talks that I had, I really impresses me how deeply he thinks about, how motivated, how passionate he is about it. I have, in my short career, I was in the US for 12 years, and I really find Indians to be so passionate about globalizing the thoughts, like Indian thoughts. And as you are working, Maharaj, for a long period of time, disseminating the Indian knowledge. And thank you so much. We need to love to continue, but given that we have so many parallel sessions going on, we need to come to a closure. Again, thank you so much. We are very grateful to you for taking time out. We're extremely thankful. So my vote of thanks to everyone who has contributed to this very nice session. People for working behind the scenes, given this time when we need to meet virtually, where we love to meet physically. There's a lot of hard work going on. Sometimes a lot of worries whether things are going to work, and that adds to the anxiety whether this thing is going to take off the way we want. But fortunately, it did without much glitches. So that was a very nice thing to happen. So finally, I'd like to thank our co-chairs, Professor Deepa Shetty and Professor Surya Prakash. They have worked hard, like they worked so hard behind the scenes to make this a real success. Again, thank you so much, Maharaj, for taking time out. It was a really, really nice time listening to you, and hope we will see you more often. And I'm really thankful to Professor Debashish Chatterjee for making this a wonderful event. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Please take care. Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.